Wilma and I were married in 1949, and from there over the next few years, we built up the farm as you see before you here. This is the farm as it looked in 1958. We had done a lot of work on it. It is a livestock farm, and we had a big amount of chickens, and workload was just far too heavy in both of us for running into health problems. So in '67 we sold out and moved to Rosetown and bought a grain farm there. This is the farm that we had at Rosetown. It didn't look like that at the time. We added lengths to the house and added a 2-car garage and a machine shed. But it's very comfortable, and we were very happy with our move to Rosetown. In 1981, we turned over the land and the construction business to the 3 boys. And we thought we had enough time for retirement, and we thought a good way to do it would be to have a motorhome, so we bought the one you see before you. We used it, drove many miles with it over the next 20 years. About the second year that we owned it, we thought we should have a little car to pull behind it, so I bought a little Toyota 74, which is mechanically very, very good. But the trouble is it had been in a hailstorm and had 132 dents in it. Jerry had some equipment for doing body work and got all the dents out of it and a paint job, and we had like a new little car. It just pulled it behind. We didn't know we had it behind. It was very good. This is a little closer up to the motorhome and with Wilma and I. In about the last 2 years that I was, from the time we turned the land over to the boys in '81, I worked a lot for them and doing field work and in the construction as well. In about 1998, I got sick, and there was a spell in my folks' lives that I knew nothing about. From the time they had finished school, my dad only had grade 4 and mom had grade 8. And until I started working out, I had no idea what they did, and I thought, it's too bad they hadn't kept a book of their lives and I had something to follow with. So I decided maybe I should write my memoirs. So while I was on the machinery, or especially on the tractor, I had a pad and pencil, and I kept making notes as I thought of things that I'd like to add or find out about. And then in 2000 we moved into Luther Heights in Saskatoon. And starting in about 2001 I wrote my memoirs. This is the book you see. It's called In Review. There was a writing club started up in Luther Heights, which I joined and found very enjoyable. And through the years up until the present, I've written 132 different articles and stories, which is in the book that's shown there, showing thoughts of a farmer. I've always had a fascination with birds, and when we were still on the farm, I got some oil paint and I started doing some paintings and I really enjoyed it. And over a few years I painted 52 different birds. This is some of that you see. The frames you'll notice are all a little bit different, but pardon me, I should say all the same. They're made out of the parts of an old wagon. It's a solid oak, and they're made beautiful frames. This just shows a little close-up of a couple of them. Before we had moved into Saskatoon, starting in about 1986, I was looking for a project to do in my shop, and I had a very good shop with a lot of tools. And I decided to build a farmstead at Donovan that I had grown up in. And I found I had a pretty good recall of the sizes and shapes and so on, because I had done quite a bit of work painting and so on like that in them. So I built the whole farm up, and I really enjoyed doing it. And I was mentioning to Wilma how much I enjoyed doing it, and she said to me, why don't you start at the beginning when the homesteaders came here and show the development of farmsteads over the 100 years, more or less. And this is what's displayed here. It's at the Western Development Museum. It has been for 24 years. This is just a write-up about farm life in miniature. It shows what happened in many cases when the homesteaders came out and left the railway and had picked out the land in a quarter section at that time, which could be had for $10. And this would show what a homesteader had bought a few articles that he thought he needed at the homestead, a stove and his clothing in the trunk, and maybe seeds of plow there, so he could break the land, and other tools he'd have in the box too to build himself a shack. Closer of the man than going to the homestead. In the prairie part of the prairies, there were no trees to build log buildings, so they made their buildings out of sod. If they had had plastic in those days to put underneath the sod of the roof, they would have had a very comfortable house. But as it was, if it rained for 3 days afterwards, dripping down inside, and that was the big fault with it. But they were very, very warm in winter and cool in summer, so it was a good start. In the northern part of where the trees grew bigger, they built with trees. This shows a barn that's been built with logs. It might be a saw mill on this, and they cut some boards, and instead of sinking, they lay the boards down, which weren't really waterproof, but they did the job. Some of them that came from parts of Europe knew how to work with thatch, and they cover the roof with thatch, as it shows here. This is the thrashing scene. Because each farm was very, very small, they didn't have equipment or couldn't afford the equipment. And in some cases, farmers would go together, maybe 12 or 15 of them, buy the outfit that's seen in the picture here, and they'd go from one place to the other thrashing. Or in some cases, American farmers came up and they had sold out for fairly good money in the States, and they'd buy equipment, as you see, and with the cook car and book car you see in the background, the gray buildings, they'd just go from one place to another with and do the bit of thrashing that each farmer had. It's kind of very, very convenient actually to have that done that way. As stated in the write-up here, some farmers worked in lumber camps or railroad construction to earn money. And the sad part of it was if they left a wife at home, she almost died of lonesomeness. And it was very hard, and after a while they got so that some of them would live together during the winter to overcome that sadness. There's a story that at Mounted Police, one of their jobs was to go to the homesteads and make sure that they had food enough for their animals and certainly for themselves. And he came to one place, and the woman it was at night, and he knocked on the door, and she just about died of fright. And finally he said, "This is the RCMP," and she opened the door, and she just about fell into his arms, and he noticed he was just about dying from lonesomeness. And he knew another lady about 10 miles away was in the same condition, so he arranged to have equipment and feed and stuff moved to one place, and the two of them would live together. They did that for a few years until a man had earned enough money to farm on their own. Once they had earned a few dollars, they wanted to get out of there, especially out of the sod buildings, and they put up a shack building like you see before. And they were all right in their place. Roofs were good enough to keep the rain out, but they were very cold in the winter and very hot in the summer. So they weren't really the answer to everything, but it was a start, and they were getting their foot a little farther ahead on their homestead. This would be the barn that he built for the bit of equipment that they would have at that time. They noticed the logs on the wagon. If they were near enough to some kind of bush, they'd haul 10 or 12 loads of logs like this and saw them up, and that'd be their winter fuel. And this just shows the little saws that they might have used to cut the wood into stove length and so on. My dad moved to, my mother and dad moved to the farm in 1918, and they bought an established farm from the 1910s. And the builders were brought together from other neighbors that had quit farming. And when you look at the granary, you notice that they are anything and everything because they're all different shapes and sizes, having been moved from different quarters of land. The house and barn from their previous building are the insides, you might say, of the buildings that you see coming up. They've added leans to them as the family grew and as livestock grew. You notice the house here is the high part of the roof is the original house that you saw previously with a carpet beside it, and they've moved in another section probably of another farmer that folded up and added 2 bedrooms to the house. And that's the way they have built their buildings as need was there, because they never had the money to do it all at once. The same thing applied to the barn. The barn that we saw previously was added with leans as the livestock, the 4 livestock were added to the barn. It shows a windmill that many farmers had that pumped water and a few livestock around it. You can see a few implements at the bottom here, a drill and a plow and a disc. These are copies of what my dad had used. The school I went to and my brothers and sisters went to was called Maynard. It's 2 miles north of the farm. We walked to school or rode bikes or horses, or some drove buggies or cars. As you see here, there's a buggy out front and a bicycle leaning against it. The car is probably a little misplaced there because the only ones that had a car that would come to school would be the inspector, who came about twice a year. It just shows some boys or children came on horseback and put their horse in the barn and brought feed with them to feed them at noon. The farm that we're going to show pretty soon is called a Walford farm. And there's an American family that the man came up first in 1910 because he had 5 boys and 3 girls, and the boys all wanted a farm. They felt the land price in North Dakota had gotten beyond reach, and they heard of land being very cheap in the prairie provinces. So they sold out their American farm and moved to the Donovan area in 1911. And then over the next 3 years, they built the house barn. They hired 2 carpenters and built the house barn and all the buildings that you see there. And the boys all took up some land around there, and at one time, 5 boys and the 3 daughters, 3 girls had married homesteaders, and all 8 of them lived on an 8-mile stretch of road. This is the house that was built on the Walford farm in 1912 approximately. A nice looking house with no foundation under, just a dugout for a basement, and in the wintertime they had 3 stoves to heat it, and there was still anything but comfortable. This place was just a half mile from where I grew up. Here's some of the outbuildings, the garage and the machine shed that were built at the time. And at one time that was considered a show farm because it was built up so nicely and painted up very nicely too. Shows the part of the barn, a hip roof barn, a big barn, and chicken house and all the things that are needed on the farm. It shows the machine shed and the grading of the grain. With big tank wagons, as you see in the picture there, they can haul about 100 bushels of grain, which always took 4 horses to pull them because it's a big load. It shows the front of the barn where how they put the feed up into the loft. And if you look directly to the left, you'll see a team of horses there that are hooked onto a rope that when they come ahead, they pull the feed from the rack right up and into the barn, and it's dumped there. So it saves a lot of pork. Moving on, this is getting into the more modern area where the machinery and tractors have come in. There's a roadway behind the tractor. And these are more modern buildings, like it's a shop that is covered in steel and roof, and the side is a machine shed that's made of steel too, wooden studding, but steel siding and roof. It just shows the change in farming, actually, where they were using tractors and combines and so on. They burnt fuel, and Texaco was a big deal at that in those days, and it shows the truck into the yard and be filling the tanks that the out there too. The green you see in the background would be maybe not typical of farms of that era, but more modern farms. This just shows some granaries and the truck being loaded with grain as well. It's a fairly modern house, a two-car garage, and the style of the time at that time. They have a big deck on the back there, and families sitting around having their supper, barbecue, whatever the case may be. Having painted birds, I was kind of interested in painting. When we moved into Saskatoon, there was an artist, a professional artist, gave some lessons on painting, and I found I picked up a lot of pointers that helped me a great deal. So the next few pictures are about some of the things that I painted. It's oil painting. This is not a painting, actually. This is a picture of an actual train and elevator and stockyards that I built. And it was typical of the way town started when the railway came through. The first thing they wanted is some place they could sell their grain to, which is the need for the elevator, and the stockyards where they get rid of the stock. This is an engine that I built for the train. It's number 1392, and it's a replica of the train that ran from Saskatoon west, I think, to Hannah, Alberta. And this is typical of that train that was used for many years, steam engine. This is going ahead with the paintings that I've done. So. These are paintings. They're a little bit different in that the upper left-hand one is, I just remembered it from a picture black and white years before, and I kind of put it in color. The others I just started painting, no sketching, just painting with a brush. I've always been interested in butterflies, so from pictures and so on, I painted the butterflies that you see in the frame. These are close-up of a couple of the butterflies. This is just a painting that there had been in the district, there had been a barn that had sagged pretty bad, so I kind of painted a background for it. What you see here. Over the years, starting 10 years ago, I started painting my own Christmas cards. So, having done a bit of painting, there was a lady in here who was teaching weaving, so I thought I'd better try some of that. So I took some classes. And I ended up weaving the rug, I guess you might say, and it's used covering the organ in our entertainment room here at Edwin Ritz. The shoes you see there I carved for cowboy boots, carved out of local wood, I guess you might say. These placemats that you see are Scottish tartan. My grandson is Scottish, from Scottish descent, and this was their colors. Some work that's done is called intarsia, and everything is made out of wood, but if you're in BC, you get all colors of wood, so your sky and grass could be made out of wood, but here, of course, we get all those colors. So what isn't the actual picture of the sky and the grass, I had painted that in. As a close-up, it looks like leather, the harness that you see is leather, but actually it's wood. You can see that the sky has been painted in and the grass is painted in. This is a little different type of art. It's made out of barley straw. You've heard of a lot of weaving done with wheat straw, but I found barley straw much easier to work with. So this is made out of barley straw. It's an elevator done the same way. Once you've pressed it out, you have graining, and you can use the graining to enhance the building that you're building. I had a scroll saw, and I did some scroll saw work. I sketched out a picture, and then with the saw cut it out, and with a black background, you end up with pictures as you see ahead of you here. This is could be a immigrant shack, and a little bit more elaborate than a lot of them would be, and it's made of log and stone fireplace, and they've added a lane to it and so on like that. Shows a little bit closer the wood and stone work on it. Our son and daughter-in-law have lake property, their permanent home, and they wanted 14 shares built, so I built them out at the WDM. A couple of fellows helped me on it, and these are the 14 you can see in front of you. We took them right to the base white coat, and from there Judy painted it red. They're quite well built, they're all screw-nailed and glued. I heard on radio one day Loretta Lynn singing, "He's got the whole world in his hands." So I got the idea maybe you could make up something like that. So I took a medical glove and filled it with plaster of Paris to shape the hand. With plaster of Paris, and then with a ball painted the world on it. So there's the whole world in his hand. I was wondering what to do. I like doing things with my hands, and I was kind of running out of things to do. And Connie said, my daughter said, "Have you ever done anything thought about doing anything with leather?" And I said no. So we drove over to Tandy, and I bought a starter kit there. And we were coming home. I remembered that our youngest son John had done leather work when he was about 18 years old. But I thought he's probably got rid of all that stuff by now. But I phoned him that night, and he had everything there. And he was in with a couple of days. He came in and he brought the whole work in. So I had lots of material, tools to work with as far as leather work. So I need ideas how to what to do. So this is just a little bit different. Made kind of a trophy out of it. It was an artwork called Carving with Soapstone, and my daughter got some of the soapstone at Edmonton, daughter-in-law I should say, Judy, and she brought it down, and it's kind of interesting to work with it in that you can saw it and shape it with a knife or a file or sand it, do whatever you like. And so these are some of the articles I built out of soapstone. I made between working at home and at the WA, I made 7 tractors like this, but I gave them all away to grandchildren, great-grandchildren, boys especially. And I think there were 2 or 3 left, and they sold them at the sale spring and fall at the WDM. I haven't got any more of them now. This was done probably 20 years ago. Everything was going with pumpers were being used for everything then, so I thought I better make a model of one. So this is what the end result was. There's no oil, but it's working anyway. My daughter-in-law Judy was in Edmonton selling the paper that there was 2 short classes on jewelry making. So she stayed over and took the classes. She enjoyed doing it, and a few weeks later she showed me what she had done and how to do it, and from there on I've made about 150 to 25 pieces, necklaces, wristbands, earrings, and so on. It's rather enjoyable. These are rather interesting in that a year ago my grandson and his wife went to Iceland, and while they were there they saw these, these beads that are made from volcanic ash, and they're very, very colorful, and they brought home a dozen or so of them, so I made 4 necklaces out of them. They're beautiful, really. It shows a little bit more of the colors. These are natural colors that made beautiful necklaces, really. One of a kind. I've always liked working with my hands, so what you've seen is just a few of the things I've been building since my retirement.